she bolted from the corporate party after I caught her in bed with someone else, assuming I was heartbroken. But fate had played into my hands, as I could finally be with the younger woman I'd been hiding. Be me, 29-year-old Lucas Reynolds. Never thought I'd be telling a story like this. You hear about it happening to other men, neighbors, coworkers, guys at the local pub. They're always quick to finish their whiskey, always rush to change the subject. But when it's you, when you're the one being cheated on, the whole world tilts sideways. Nothing makes sense anymore. Your own bed feels like a stranger's. Pictures on the wall mock you. The woman you promised to spend your life with becomes someone else entirely. It all started at some fancy cocktail party in downtown Denver. Music was too loud for real conversations, but perfect for whispers and stolen glances. One of those parties where everyone's holding expensive wine. Half the people don't know why they're there. Other half are just trying to impress someone. My wife Elizabeth loved these events. She thrived in them, her laughter always cutting through the air, her hand touching someone's arm while telling stories. Always the center of attention. That night she wore this black dress, the kind that makes men stare, makes women look away in jealousy. Remember her twirling in front of our bedroom mirror? How do I look? Told her she was stunning. Because she was, can't deny that. We arrived together, didn't stay together long though. Elizabeth had this talent, could disappear into crowds like smoke. Me, I just stood there, nursing my bourbon, nodding along to whatever conversation found me. But something felt wrong that night. Noticed it in how she moved. Too eager. Her smile too bright. Tried brushing it off at first. Told myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia grows. Like weeds in a garden. Saw her across the marble floor. Talking to some guy I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed. Looked like he walked out of some luxury magazine. Custom suit, perfect hair. That smug half-smirk that I instantly hated. His name was Andrew. Elizabeth leaned in close while he whispered something. They laughed together. Like they shared some private joke. My stomach dropped to my feet. I downed my drink. Started walking across the room. Halfway there, Elizabeth caught my eye. Her smile faltered for just a second. I caught it though. She straightened up. Moved away from Andrew. Her face turned into that familiar mask. That polite indifference I'd seen before. Hey, I said, keeping my voice light. Who's your friend? Elizabeth didn't miss a beat. Oh, that's Andrew. He works with Claire. Remember Claire, don't you? Of course I remembered Claire. Smiled at Andrew. Extended my hand. Nice to meet you. He hesitated for a moment. Finally shook my hand. His grip was firm, but something smug in the way he looked at me. Like he knew something I didn't. Elizabeth laughed. Looped her arm through mine. You're so serious sometimes, Lucas. Come on, let's get another drink. She practically dragged me away. Her grip on my arm was too tight. Should have been my first real clue. Later that evening, Elizabeth left her phone on the table. Never been the type to snoop before. Always believed in trust, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But something about her behavior that night, it nagged at me like a splinter under my skin. While she was outside laughing with friends, I sat on the edge of the couch, stared at her unlocked phone. Her messages were open. Wish I could say I hesitated. That I thought long and hard about what I was doing. Truth is, my thumb moved on its own. Started scrolling through texts, and there it was. A conversation with him, with Andrew. Messages buried under other chats. But I found them. Andrew, can't wait to see you tonight. That dress better be for me. Elizabeth, you'll see soon enough. Be good. Andrew, no promises. My chest tightened. Kept scrolling up. Heart pounding so loud. Was sure someone would hear it. Found more messages. Weeks of conversations. Plans to meet up. Jokes that went beyond friendly. Compliments that crossed every line. The worst part? Elizabeth wasn't shutting him down. She was encouraging it. Sat there staring at the screen. Felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was flirting with another man right under my nose. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Heard her laugh outside, light and carefree, like she didn't have a care in the world. My blood boiled. Wanted to storm outside, shove her phone in her face, demand answers. But something stopped me. No, not here. Not now. Slid the phone back onto the table. Stood up, walked outside. Elizabeth saw me and waved, her smile bright as ever. Came over and slipped her arm around my waist. Having fun, she asked, voice dripping with sweetness. Looked down at her. For the first time, I really saw her. Not the woman I thought she was, but someone else entirely. Someone I didn't know. Yeah, I said, forced to smile. A blast. She didn't know I'd seen everything. Not yet. She thought I was just upset, maybe even a little hurt. And I was, but that night, something darker settled inside me. I wasn't just upset. I was planning revenge. Next morning felt like waking up after a nightmare, except the cold reality sat heavy on my chest. Laid in bed staring at the ceiling. Elizabeth hummed a cheerful tune in the kitchen. That used to make me smile. Her casual happiness. Now it just grated on my nerves. How could she hum like that? So unbothered after what I'd seen. After him. After Andrew. That smug bastard's name rang in my head. Like a migraine that wouldn't quit. Finally dragged myself out of bed. Heavy with exhaustion I hadn't earned. Stood at the bathroom sink. Splashed cold water on my face. Hoped it would wash away some of the anger. The anger that was threatening to eat me alive. Looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't me. Bags under my eyes were darker. Jaw clenched so tight it ached. Looked like a man on the edge. And when I stepped into the kitchen, Elizabeth was leaning against the marble counter, her phone beside her, smiling at something on the screen. Don't know why, but the sight of her and that damn phone made my blood boil. Fought to keep my face blank. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said with a grin. Held out a steaming mug of coffee, like it was any other day. "Morning." My voice came out flat, almost robotic. Took the coffee and sat down across from her. She sipped her drink. Scrolling on her phone, acting like she wasn't hiding a double life in there, I watched her carefully, cataloging every movement, the way her thumb tapped the screen, the flicker of a smirk when a message popped up, the way her eyes darted to me briefly, like she sensed something was off. "You okay?" she asked, tilted her head. Her tone was casual, but her gaze sharpened slightly. "You're quiet this morning." Forced a smile. Felt like stretching barbed wire across my teeth. "Just tired." "Long night." Elizabeth nodded, seemed satisfied, turned her attention back to her phone. I wanted to grab it, smash it against the floor. Wanted to shout, "I know," right in her face. Watch her expression twist in guilt and panic. But I held it in, not yet. Needed to play this smart. Wasn't about to accuse her without more evidence. If I was going to confront her, and I wanted to leave her no room to lie. No wiggle room to escape. No way to gaslight me with, "You're imagining things," or "It's not what you think." I needed the full story. And once I had it, I'd make sure it hurt. The hours ticked by slowly. Every second felt like an eternity. Spent the day in a fog, watching Elizabeth with new eyes. Every laugh, every word, every glance at her phone took on new meaning. Studied her like a detective studying a suspect. And as much as I hated to admit it, she was good at hiding things. Around lunch, she asked casually, "Hey, do you mind if I meet up with Claire this evening?" She wanted to grab dinner. Claire. Of course it's always Claire, isn't it? Held her gaze a moment longer than I should have. Watched her smile falter for just a second. Before she covered it up, "Sure," I said evenly. "Tell her I said hi." She grinned, kissed my cheek, disappeared into the bedroom to get ready. The moment she was out of sight, felt a knot twist in my stomach. Was losing control of myself. Torn between rage and the need to know everything, I had to follow her. That evening, parked my truck 2 blocks from the restaurant, the one Elizabeth said she'd be at. Call me a fool, call me paranoid. I didn't care anymore. My gut told me something was off, and I wasn't about to ignore it. If she really was with Claire, I'd deal with my shame later. But if she wasn't, sat in my truck for a while, staring at the restaurant's entrance, heart hammering in my chest. Elizabeth showed up right on time. She looked good, too good, her hair done up perfectly. Lipstick a shade darker than usual. Clenched the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles went white. 10 minutes passed, and then he arrived. Andrew. The bastard walked right up to her, grinning like a man who just won the lottery. Elizabeth smiled at him. Smiled like she used to smile at me. My blood went cold. They hugged, lingered just a little too long, then disappeared inside together. My hands trembled, pulled out my phone, opened her messages. Of course, I still remembered her passcode. And there it was, a text sent to Claire that read, "Dinner plans are on. Same spot as usual. Love you." Love you? She was lying to me. Right to my face, and covering her tracks so perfectly, I almost felt impressed. Almost didn't follow them inside. Didn't need to. Seeing them together, seeing the way she smiled at him, was enough to confirm everything. Sat in my truck for what felt like hours, staring out the windshield. My mind a whirlwind of anger, heartbreak, and something colder, something darker. By the time I drove home, I'd made a decision. This wasn't going to end the way Elizabeth thought it would. She thought she could play me, lie to me, laugh with him, and hum in the kitchen like nothing was happening. But I wasn't stupid. I wasn't weak. She might have thought I was just another man to fool, but she was wrong. I was going to make sure she knew exactly who she was messing with. And I wasn't just planning revenge. I was perfecting it. The drive home was a blur. Headlights, stoplights, white-hot anger simmering beneath the surface. Didn't play music, didn't think, didn't need to. The image of Elizabeth and Andrew, laughing, leaning close, disappearing into that restaurant, was burned into my mind like a brand. When I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different, colder, bigger. Elizabeth wasn't home yet. Of course she wasn't. She was still with him, probably sipping wine, trading whispered lies. Parked in the garage, turned off the engine, sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as my heart pounded in my chest. I'd read stories about this kind of betrayal before. The cheating wife, the oblivious husband. Usually the husband goes off the rails, yells, begs, smashes things. That wasn't me. I wasn't going to be some pathetic fool, begging for scraps of the truth. No, I was going to take my time. I was going to make Elizabeth feel this betrayal. Walked into the house. The silence was so thick, felt like it had actual weight. Turned on a few lights, started pacing the living room, every sound amplified in the emptiness. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Snatched it up, pulse spiking. It was a text from Elizabeth. Running late. Claire and I are catching up. Don't wait up for me. Love you. Love you. The words made me sick. Nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity. How easily she could lie. Like it was second nature. She thought I was still in the dark. She thought she was smarter than me. That her little story about Claire would hold up forever. She was wrong. Sat down on the couch. Opening Elizabeth's phone messages again, I'd memorized her passcode earlier. A detail she hadn't thought to protect. My thumb hovered over Andrew's messages. But I didn't need to read them again. I knew what they said. What I needed was proof. Something undeniable. Elizabeth didn't come home until after midnight. I was still sitting in the darkened living room, a single lamp glowing in the corner. The sound of her key turning in the lock was deafening. When she stepped inside, she jumped. Jesus, Lucas, she laughed nervously, her hand clutching her chest. What are you doing up? I smiled faintly, leaning back on the couch, like I didn't have a care in the world. Couldn't sleep. Oh, she hesitated, hanging her coat on the rack. Slipping out of her heels, she looked at me a little too carefully, like she was trying to gauge my mood. Everything okay? Yeah, I said smoothly. How was dinner with Claire? Elizabeth blinked, just for a second, before her expression softened into something casual. Oh, it was great. We haven't had a chance to catch up in so long. You know how it is? I nodded slowly. Watching her lie. After lie. After lie? Well, she said, with a small, tired smile. I'm going to bed. You coming? In a bit, I replied, keeping my tone even. I'll clean up here first. Okay, night babe, she said softly, disappearing down the hallway. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Before letting my mask slip, my hands trembled, my nails digging into my palms. Over the next week, I became a man possessed. Started watching her more closely, tracking her movements, her habits, her excuses. I'd leave work early some days, trailing her car at a distance when she went to the gym or to run errands. It didn't take long to catch her. 2 days later, followed her to a small, cheap hotel. On the outskirts of Denver, parked a block away, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly. I thought it might snap. Her car was already there. I waited. 20 minutes later, Andrew's car pulled into the lot, and I watched as he strolled inside, like he didn't have a care in the world. I could have gone in after him, stormed the place, caught them in the act. But I didn't. That would have been too easy, too quick. Elizabeth and Andrew were playing a game, and they thought they were winning. But I wasn't about to flip the board over. I was going to let them keep playing, let them think they were getting away with it, until I was ready to end it. On my terms, I took pictures. Elizabeth's car, Andrew's car, him walking inside. I'd have everything I needed soon. At home, Elizabeth acted like nothing had changed. She kissed my cheek, laughed at my jokes, cuddled up next to me on the couch, like the doting wife she pretended to be. It was infuriating how good she was at this, how convincing her act was. But every word, every touch, only fueled the fire inside me. One night as we lay in bed, Elizabeth curled into me, her head resting on my chest. I stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing. Love you, she whispered, her voice soft, sweet, deceptive. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat and forced myself to respond. Love you too, she sighed contentedly. Already half asleep, I watched her, my jaw tightening. Not for much longer, I thought. I spent the next few days planning, every free moment dedicated to figuring out how to dismantle her carefully crafted lies. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to expose her. I'd gather my evidence, confront her at the perfect moment, and destroy every illusion she'd built. But I wasn't doing this out of pure anger. No, I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the shame, the betrayal, everything I'd felt. I wanted her to know that I knew, and I wanted Andrew to know that he hadn't won anything. Elizabeth thought she was untouchable, But she had no idea what was coming. There comes a point when the anger burns so hot, it stops being chaotic, turns cold, sharp, like a blade you're honing. That's where I was. The rage I'd felt watching Elizabeth laugh with Andrew, the gut punch of reading their texts, it had settled into something darker. I wasn't just furious anymore. I was focused. Elizabeth still thought I was the same oblivious, trusting husband she'd been fooling for months. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, sent me little texts during the day, asked what I wanted for dinner. I played along, every word, every fake smile, drawing me closer to the moment. I dropped the mask. The truth was, I wasn't wasting a single second. Every move I made now had a purpose. I started small. First, I installed a tracking app on Elizabeth's phone. She'd left it charging in the kitchen one night, and with her passcode, it took less than 2 minutes to install. Simple, invisible, and exactly what I needed. I didn't have to follow her anymore. I could see her location in real time. The gym, the store, lies, all of it. The second step was gathering evidence. The photos of her car and Andrew's at that hotel were just the beginning. I started recording phone calls, hers and mine. Just in case, I kept screenshots of her texts to Andrew, backing them up in multiple places. I even saved voice memos of my own observations, detailing every little lie she fed me. It wasn't enough to prove she was cheating. No, I wanted to dismantle her story entirely, erase any wiggle room she might have. To escape the truth, 2 weeks later, Elizabeth announced she had plans to spend another evening with Claire. Really? I asked, sipping my coffee and keeping my expression neutral. Claire's getting a lot of your time lately. She froze for just a moment, her hand halfway to her mug. It was so brief, I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching her so closely. Then she laughed. Yeah, well, her fiancé is out of town, so she's been lonely. You know how it is. Of course, I said with a small smile. Have fun. That night after Elizabeth left the house, I opened my laptop and checked her location. Sure enough, she wasn't heading towards Claire's place. She was going back to the same damn hotel. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I had the photos, the messages, the recordings, all the proof I needed to confront her. But as much as I wanted to blow everything up right then, I held myself back. I wasn't going to settle for a simple confrontation. I wanted something bigger, something she'd never recover from. I thought about Elizabeth's friends, her perfect little circle of people who thought she was charming, loyal and adorable. I thought about Andrew, who probably strutted around, thinking he'd stolen another man's wife. And I thought about how good Elizabeth was at lying to my face, how she made me feel like I was crazy for even suspecting something. That's when I decided I wouldn't just confront her privately. I'd do it publicly. Elizabeth thrived on appearances. She loved being admired, being the perfect wife in everyone's eyes. If I was going to destroy her, I'd do it in front of the people who mattered to her most. I'd rip off the mask she wore and show everyone exactly who she was. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Elizabeth's birthday was coming up. She'd planned a small gathering at our house, a mix of friends, co-workers, and a few family members. She spent days perfecting every detail. From the decorations to the playlist, I watched her bustle around the house with a smile on her face, and I couldn't help but marvel at her audacity. Everything's going to be perfect, she said one evening. As we sat on the couch, of course, I said, smiling just enough to be convincing. You deserve a great night. And she would have one, just not in the way she expected. The night of the party, Elizabeth was in her element. She wore another one of those dresses, form-fitting, attention-grabbing, the kind that made people notice her. The second she walked into a room, her smile was wide, her laughter infectious, and everyone adored her. She thought she was invincible. I mingled with the guests, making small talk, keeping up appearances. My heart was pounding, but I didn't let it show. I knew what I was about to do, and I knew there was no coming back from it. A part of me felt sick. After all, this was my wife. I'd loved her for years, built a life with her. But then I remembered the text, the hotel, him. By the time the party was in full swing, I was ready. I stood near the center of the living room, a drink in my hand, and clinked the glass with a spoon. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward me. Elizabeth was standing off to the side, a surprised smile on her face. Everyone, I said, forcing my voice to sound warm and cheerful. Can I have your attention for a moment? Elizabeth tilted her head, clearly confused, but still smiling. Lucas, what are you doing? I ignored her. I just wanted to take a minute to celebrate my beautiful wife. I looked around the room, my gaze lingering on her friends, her co-workers, the people she wanted so badly to impress. Elizabeth's been such a wonderful partner. And I think it's only fair that I show you all just how dedicated she's been lately. Elizabeth's smile faltered. Lucas, here's to Elizabeth, I continued, holding up my phone. And here's to Andrew. I pressed a button, and the room was filled with the sound of their messages, those same flirty, sickening texts I'd read weeks ago. Can't wait to see you tonight. That dress better be for me. The room went dead silent. Someone gasped. Elizabeth's face drained of color, her mouth falling open in shock. Lucas, stop, she shouted. Rushing toward me, I stepped back, my voice calm and cold. Why? Don't you want everyone to know how special you and Andrew are? I turned to the crowd. For those of you who don't know, Andrew's been seeing my wife behind my back. Thought you should hear it straight from the source. Elizabeth was shaking now, tears pooling in her eyes. Please stop, but I didn't stop. I let the messages play out. Let everyone hear the lies, the betrayal. I watched as her friends looked at her, with shock and pity. I watched as her co-workers exchanged awkward glances, unsure where to look. And in that moment, Elizabeth, my confident, charming wife, crumbled. Her perfect little world shattered into 1,000 pieces. And I didn't feel sorry for her, not one bit. The room was a mess of shocked faces and awkward silence. The last of Elizabeth's messages faded out, but the damage was done. My wife stood frozen in the center of the room, her face pale, her hands shaking, her eyes darted around, searching for someone, anyone to come to her rescue, to undo what I'd just done. No one moved. No one said a word. For once, Elizabeth wasn't in control. Her carefully curated world, the one where she was the perfect wife, the beloved friend, the shining star, was gone, and I'd done it. I'd ripped it away from her, in front of everyone she cared about. She stumbled toward me, her voice breaking. Lucas, what is wrong with you? You're embarrassing yourself. I stared at her, feeling the weight of every lie she'd fed me. Her voice, her tears. They were just another act, another performance to save herself. Me? I said, my tone deadly calm. I'm embarrassing myself? You've been sneaking around with Andrew for months. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Her eyes widened, and she shook her head, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. That's not true. You've got this all wrong, Lucas. Save it, I snapped. Don't insult me any more than you already have. The crowd was watching us, like spectators at a car crash, too horrified to look away. I could feel the pity in their eyes, but I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see the truth. I wasn't the fool here. Andrew wasn't there, of course. I'd made sure of that. I wasn't going to let him walk in and act like a victim. This was Elizabeth's night, her reckoning. Lucas, please, she said softly now, her tears finally falling. Let's talk about this in private. I laughed bitterly. Private? Oh, now you want privacy? Too late for that. I turned to the guests, spreading my arms in mock cheerfulness. I'm sorry, everyone. I know you didn't come here for a show, but I figured Elizabeth deserved a little honesty tonight. Her best friend Jennifer stepped forward, her expression a mix of confusion and horror. Elizabeth, is this true? Elizabeth turned to her, looking desperate. No, of course not. He's upset. He doesn't know what he's saying. Jennifer's gaze shifted to me. Lucas, I pulled my phone from my pocket again, scrolling through the evidence I'd saved. I turned the screen toward Jennifer, showing her the photos of Elizabeth's car at the hotel, Andrew's messages, the proof that left no room for doubt. Jennifer gasped, covering her mouth. Others murmured, their voices a low hum of disbelief. Elizabeth looked at me then, her face crumpling. For the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Fear. She knew there was no getting out of this. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered, her voice raw. To you? I repeated, my voice rising. You did this to us. You threw everything we had away for him. You don't get to play the victim here, Elizabeth. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The room felt heavy, suffocating, as everyone watched the woman they thought they knew unravel. After what felt like an eternity, people began to leave. No one said much. They avoided Elizabeth, whispering to each other as they grabbed their coats and slipped out the door. A few offered me awkward pats on the back, unsure what else to say. I didn't care. Let them go. I had what I wanted. When the last guest finally left, Elizabeth and I were alone. She stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, staring blankly into the darkness outside. The confident, smug woman I'd seen at that party weeks ago was gone. I sat on the couch watching her, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I'd exposed her. I destroyed the lies. But now what? Why? I asked quietly. Breaking the silence, Elizabeth turned to me, her eyes red and puffy. Why what? Why him? Why any of this? Were you bored? Did you want out of this marriage? Was I not enough for you? My voice cracked despite my best effort to stay calm. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Lucas, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I demanded. Explain it to me. Make me understand. She didn't answer. She couldn't, and that told me everything I needed to know. I slept in the guest room that night. Elizabeth stayed in our bedroom, and for the first time, the house felt like a war zone. Silent, tense, broken. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night over and over. Her face when I hit play on those messages. The gasps from her friends. The way she begged me to stop, as if I was the one who'd hurt her. And Andrew, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The smug way he'd looked at me. When I shook his hand at that party, the messages he sent to Elizabeth. Like I didn't exist. He was still out there, probably thinking he'd gotten away with it. Elizabeth might have been exposed, but Andrew, he hadn't felt the consequences yet. That wasn't going to last. This wasn't over. The next morning, Elizabeth tried to talk to me. She knocked on the guest room door, her voice soft and timid. Lucas, can we talk? I ignored her. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. I wasn't ready to deal with the broken pieces of what was left. Instead, I picked up my phone and sent a text to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Andrew's boss. I'd done some digging in the past week, and I knew exactly where Andrew worked. A nice, cushy job in consulting. A job that wouldn't appreciate the kind of attention I was about to bring to it. Hi, Mr. Thompson. I think there's something you should know about one of your employees. Can we talk? I hit send and set the phone down, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Elizabeth had chosen to betray me. Andrew had chosen to disrespect me. Now I was choosing to make them pay. I didn't hear from Mr. Thompson until the following day. I was at my desk, nursing a second cup of black coffee I didn't need, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen told me everything I needed to know. Mr. Thompson, I can talk now. Call me. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. Andrew had walked into my life and turned it upside down. He'd smiled at me, shook my hand, and carried on like I was nothing. Elizabeth had made her choice, and so had he. Now I was making mine. I stepped outside, my hands steady, my heart pounding. The late morning sun felt harsh, unforgiving. As I dialed the number, the line clicked, and Mr. Thompson's voice came through, brisk and professional. Hello, Lucas. What's this about Andrew? I swallowed, keeping my voice calm and measured. Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I'm sure this is unexpected, but I thought you should know something about Andrew. Something that might concern you and your company. There was a pause. Go on. Andrew has been carrying on an affair with my wife. It's been going on for months. I've got evidence, photos, messages, everything. And I thought you might want to know because, well, I let my voice trail off for effect. I can't imagine a company like yours would appreciate the kind of scandal that could bring, to his credit, Mr. Thompson didn't jump to conclusions. Lucas, that's a serious accusation. I know, I said smoothly, which is why I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I can send you the evidence I've gathered. You can make your own judgment after that. Fine, he said after a beat. Send it over. I ended the call and forwarded everything. The screenshots of the messages, the photos of Elizabeth's car and Andrew's at the hotel, and even a few clips of their texts I'd recorded. For good measure, I included a note. I'm not trying to ruin anyone's life, but you deserve to know who's working for you. It was a lie. I was trying to ruin his life. By the time Elizabeth came home that evening, I'd already heard back. Mr. Thompson replied with a curt email. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll handle it internally. That was enough for me. When Elizabeth walked through the door, I was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. She paused when she saw me, her face uncertain. We hadn't spoken much in days, and I could tell it was starting to wear on her. Hey, she said cautiously, setting her bag down. How was your day? Eventful, I replied, my voice flat. She frowned. What does that mean? I leaned back in my chair, my eyes locked on hers. It means Andrew's about to have a very bad week. Her face went white. What did you do? I smiled coldly. I told his boss everything. Sent the photos, the messages, all of it? Lucas, she cried, her voice breaking. Why would you do that? Why? I snapped, standing up so quickly, the chair scraped against the floor. Because he walked into my life like I didn't exist. Because you let him. You think I was just going to sit here and take it? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand. This isn't how you fix this. Fix this? I repeated, laughing bitterly. There's no fixing this, Elizabeth. You made sure of that. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. You've ruined everything. No, I said quietly, my voice low and deliberate. You ruined everything. I'm just making sure you live with it. The fallout came quickly. 2 days later, Andrew was fired. I knew because Elizabeth screamed at me the moment she found out. She cornered me in the living room, her face blotchy from crying, her voice hoarse with anger. You ruined his life, Lucas. Good, I shot back. Maybe next time he'll think twice. Before going after another man's wife. This isn't you, she sobbed. You're not this person. She was right. I wasn't, or at least I hadn't been. But something about betrayal, something about watching the person you love throw you away like you mean nothing, changes you. It strips away the softer parts of you and leaves something harder, colder in its place. She stormed off, slamming the door to the bedroom behind her. I didn't follow. I didn't care. Let her cry. Let her feel the weight of what she'd done. That night I sat alone in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the glow of the TV. I wasn't watching it. I was staring at the floor. My thoughts tangled. I'd wanted this. I'd wanted Elizabeth to hurt the way she'd hurt me. I'd wanted Andrew to lose everything. His job, his confidence, his sense of invincibility. And now that it had happened, I should have felt satisfied. But I didn't. The house felt empty now. Elizabeth didn't speak to me after that fight. She stayed in the bedroom, and I stayed on the couch. We existed under the same roof like strangers. I realized then that revenge didn't heal anything. It didn't fix the broken pieces. All it did was burn everything to the ground. But part of me still didn't regret it. Elizabeth thought she could betray me and get away with it. Andrew thought he could take something that wasn't his. They were both wrong. The next morning, Elizabeth came into the kitchen, her face pale and hollow. She looked at me across the table, her voice small. Are you happy now? I met her gaze unflinching. No, she swallowed hard, tears pooling in her eyes. Then why? Because I wanted you to know what it feels like to lose. She stared at me for a long time, before whispering, we can't come back from this. Can we? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth. I never thought I'd see Elizabeth like that. Standing in front of a judge, looking small and broken, she was a shadow of the woman I'd once known. The woman who used to command every room she walked into. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer beside me, calm and collected, while Elizabeth stood with her attorney, holding herself together by the thinnest of threads. This wasn't how marriages were supposed to end, but here we were. The judge called the session to order, and my lawyer began laying it all out for the court. Cold, unending facts, irreconcilable differences. Adultery. The word adultery hung in the room like a fog, and I saw Elizabeth flinch, her head dipping, as though she could escape the shame by not meeting anyone's eyes. She didn't have to look up to know. I was watching her. The judge turned to Elizabeth's attorney. Your client may respond. Elizabeth didn't wait for her lawyer to speak. To everyone's surprise, she stood. Her hands trembled as she held the table for balance. But when she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. Your Honor, she began softly, her voice wavering. I don't want to fight. I don't want this to be another battle. I stared at her, cold and silent. Elizabeth turned to face me then, her expression pleading, raw in a way I hadn't seen since this whole nightmare began. Lucas, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, let's resolve this peacefully. I almost laughed. Peacefully? After everything? She swallowed hard, her gaze darting around the courtroom, as though searching for the right words. I know I hurt you. I know what I did can't be undone. But you don't have to destroy me. We can end this quietly, fairly. The room fell silent. Even the judge seemed to hesitate, giving her the space to speak. Elizabeth's voice cracked. You loved me once? You don't have to hate me now. Hearing her say that, you don't have to hate me now, was like a spark in a room soaked with gasoline. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my face to stay neutral, calm, collected. But inside I was a storm. I had loved her once. I'd given her everything I had to give, and she'd thrown it all away for a man who didn't deserve her or me. And now, standing in front of me, she wanted mercy. The judge turned to me. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to respond? I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Elizabeth looked at me, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes, as though she thought she'd reached me, broken through the cold wall I'd built between us. She was wrong. I cleared my throat and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, my wife's plea for peace would have been more convincing. If she hadn't spent months lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, I'm not here to bargain. I'm here to get what's fair. I intend to take everything she tried to take from me. Our home, our finances, our life. I won't pretend that what happened didn't happen. I glanced at Elizabeth then, her face frozen in shock. She made her choices. Now she'll live with them. The judge nodded. scribbling something on his notes. Understood. We proceed as filed. Elizabeth sat back down, her shoulders shaking, as she tried to hold back her sobs. I didn't look at her again. Couldn't. Not because I felt sorry for her. When the hearing adjourned, Elizabeth tried to speak to me. She caught me just outside the courtroom doors, her voice desperate and broken. "Lucas, please," she choked out, clutching at my sleeve. "It doesn't have to be like this." I pulled my arm free, my voice quiet but firm. "Yes, Elizabeth, it does." She stood there alone as I walked away. Walking out of the courthouse that day felt like the closing of a chapter, but it wasn't a relief. Elizabeth had begged, pleaded for peace, for an ounce of mercy, but I didn't give it to her. Couldn't. She didn't deserve it. My footsteps echoed through the cold marble hallway. As I left her behind, her soft sobs still lingering in my ears, I told myself I didn't care. When I got home, the silence was deafening. The house felt bigger now, empty in a way it hadn't before. I tossed my keys on the counter and dropped into a chair at the kitchen table. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel, the vindication, wasn't there. Instead, I just felt tired, like the fight had taken more out of me than I'd realized. My phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was a message from her sister Lily. "Lily, you've made your point, Lucas. She's got nothing left. Was this really worth it?" I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Lily had always been Elizabeth's biggest defender, and now she was coming after me. As though I was the villain in this story, I clenched my jaw and typed back. She got what she deserved. No response. I tossed the phone aside and leaned back, rubbing a hand over my face. Deep down, a nagging thought started to crawl its way to the surface. Was this really worth it? I pushed it down, buried it beneath the anger. That had carried me this far. The days that followed were a blur. I worked late to avoid coming home. When I did come back, I'd sit in the living room, with the TV on but never watch it. I was surrounded by the remnants of my old life, photos on the walls, dishes in the cabinets, her perfume lingering faintly on the sheets. Elizabeth's absence should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like a hole had been punched through the center of everything. A week after the hearing, I ran into Andrew. I didn't expect it. I was at the gas station, filling up my truck. When he pulled up at the next pump, he looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, stubble covering his face, his usual smug confidence nowhere to be found. "Lucas," he said finally, his voice low. I turned back to the pump, pretending he didn't exist. I didn't owe him anything, not a word, not a glance. "Hey," he said again, stepping closer, "I need to talk to you." "I don't want to hear it," I muttered. "I didn't think it would end up like this," he continued, tone hollow. "I didn't think she'd lose everything." I looked at him then, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "You don't get to play the good guy now, Andrew. You helped destroy my marriage. You helped her lie to me for months. You don't get to stand here and act like you regret it." He flinched at the venom in my words. "But I wasn't done. You think this is my fault?" I demanded. "She made her bed. And you crawled right into it with her. You both deserve everything you got." He stared at me, defeated, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. Maybe he hadn't expected Elizabeth's world to fall apart the way it had. Maybe he thought I'd just yell, maybe break a few things and move on. But I wasn't that man. Not anymore. "Stay the hell out of my way," I said quietly. Turning back to my truck, Andrew didn't say anything else. He just nodded slowly, like he'd finally realized what he'd helped create, and walked back to his carrot because I didn't ensure of that. When I got home that night, I couldn't shake the encounter. I sat on the couch staring at the walls, my mind racing. Andrew's words echoed in my head. I didn't think she'd lose everything. Elizabeth had lost the house, the money, the friends who stopped calling after they learned the truth. Her life as she knew it had been burned to the ground, and I was the one who lit the match. But if I was honest with myself, I'd lost something too. I picked up a framed photo of us from years ago, back when we were happy, or at least I thought we were. Elizabeth was laughing, her arms wrapped around me. As I smiled at the camera, we looked so young, so naive. I didn't recognize either of us anymore. I thought destroying Elizabeth would bring me closure, but now all I felt was emptiness. I won, yes, but at what cost? The phone buzzed beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. It was another message, this time from Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry for everything. I mean that I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it." I stared at the message for a long time, my chest tight. Sorry. She'd said that before, and it hadn't meant a damn thing, but this time it felt different. Maybe because the fight was over. Maybe because she had nothing left to lose. I typed a response, then deleted it. I tried again, my thumb hovering over the send button. before I erased it completely. What was the point? I set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes. The silence stretched out around me, heavy and endless. Elizabeth's world was gone. Mine was too. And no apology could change that. Weeks passed, and the dust began to settle. Life moved on as it always does. But it felt different now. Quieter, emptier. Elizabeth was gone. The house, the accounts, everything was mine. But victory didn't feel like I thought it would. I'd taken everything from her, just as I'd promised. But instead of triumph, all I had left was silence. One evening I was sitting on the porch, staring at the sun sinking below the trees, when I spotted Elizabeth's car pull up. In front of the house, my chest tightened, but I didn't move. She stepped out, looking worn and fragile, her figure smaller than I remembered. She clutched an envelope in her hand. As she approached the steps, "Lucas," she said softly. Stopping at the bottom, I didn't respond. I just watched her, my expression unreadable. She sighed and looked down at the envelope. "I'm not here to fight you. She paused like she was gathering her words. "I wanted to give you this." She held it out, and I hesitated before taking it. The paper felt heavy, final, though I didn't know why. "What is it?" I asked, my voice flat. "Just read it," she said. Stepping back, her eyes met mine then. And for the first time, I didn't see excuses or lies. I saw regret. "Goodbye, Lucas," she said. She turned and walked back to her car. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought about calling her back, but the words wouldn't come. I just watched her drive away, her car shrinking into the distance, until it was gone. I sat there for a long time, the envelope held in my hands. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Elizabeth's handwriting was shaky, the words smudged in places, but they were clear enough. "Lucas, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need you to understand something. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I don't expect you to believe me, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but it's the truth. When I started seeing Andrew, I thought I was looking for something I'd lost. Maybe it was excitement, maybe it was attention. I don't even know anymore. But the more I lied to you, the more I realized that I wasn't just hurting you. I was losing myself too. You didn't deserve what I did. You were a good husband, better than I deserved. And no matter what you think of me now, I hope you find peace someday. I hope you find happiness again. I'm sorry, Lucas, for everything. Goodbye, Elizabeth." I read the letter 3 times, the words twisting something deep inside me. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a plea. It was just an apology, a real one this time. I set the letter down on the table and stared out at the empty road, my mind a mess of thoughts I couldn't untangle. Elizabeth was gone. Andrew was gone. The anger that had driven me for so long was starting to fade, leaving behind something heavier. I thought taking everything from her would fill the void she'd left. But now I realized it couldn't. Revenge had given me power, but it hadn't given me peace. I stood up and walked back into the house, the echoes of our life together still lingering in the empty rooms. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the worn wood, where Elizabeth used to sit across from me, sipping coffee and smiling, like nothing could ever break us. Maybe I'd loved her too much. Maybe I hadn't loved her enough. Or maybe some things just aren't meant to last. That night, I grabbed a box from the garage and started packing up the house. Her photos, her clothes, the little trinkets she'd left behind. I wasn't doing it out of anger this time. I just wanted to let it all go. As I carried the box to the curb, the night was still. The stars scattered like pieces of glass. Across the sky, I looked up, exhaling slowly. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Elizabeth was gone, so was Andrew, and maybe finally I could start over.